Good morning. How are you this morning? Come on, can we just thank Jesus one more time for all that he's done in this place? Man, that worship was good. It is my honor this morning to continue to walk with you in the journey of Come As You Are. It's been a discussion that we have had as a community as we kind of wrestle with this idea of religion versus relationship. And what I love about this concept is it actually is designed to change us more than you realize. The first aspect of it, as we talk about Come As You Are, comes from this passage of Scripture in Matthew 11:28, where Jesus makes the statement. He sets the stage as he's communicating and talking to everyone that is around him, and primarily as he's discussing this with religious leaders. As people who have kind of created this barrier between us and God. And what I love is that Jesus shows up on the scene and he doesn't mess around. He doesn't spend any time fluffing it up. And he goes right at the core of everyone and where we're at. And he says, "Come to me. All of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." So Jesus makes this statement. So I think it's important to recognize that this is not just a pastor, not just a leader, not just someone. This is being made by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And it's interesting as we begin to wrestle with this idea of religion versus relationship, because religion wants us to think that we can't come. I talk so many times to people that I'm out in the community and we start talking about church, and they're like, "Hey, what do you do?" And I'm like, "I'm a pastor," especially on the golf course. And they're, because after like 9 holes of them just saying all the words that they love to say, and then they go, "Hey, so what do you do?" And they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry for all those other words I used," And it's interesting how religion makes us feel like there's no way we can step foot in the door until we get ourselves figured out. It's even interesting how we as even believers hesitate to even sometimes come back to church because we feel like, man, I just haven't been doing the stuff that I know, my wife and I, or my kids, or my job, or, I've been doing some things that I know it's amazing how all of a sudden the enemy tricks us into thinking that somehow we've got to perfect ourselves to even get. And here's the crazy thing, and I just want to show you this verse because it's unbelievable, and this is the truth in Romans 5:8, that even when we were in our worst, Christ died for us. You got to let that reality soak in, because the Bible even says in Hebrews chapter 4 that there is nothing that he doesn't see, that everything lays bare and naked before God. So just newsflash, you can't trick him. You can't wake up in the morning and put on your super magic juju juice and somehow God's like, "Wow, you are impressive." That even in your best, it's still not good enough. When we're talking about the creator of the universe, who sets the standard by his own perfection, there's nothing I can do to make myself better for him. So what does he say? I want you to understand that I want you to come as you are, because you, even on your best day, can't be good enough. So if that's what the reality is that I can't be good enough, then, and he says, "Come as you are," then the good news is that we just get to come as we are. That when the enemy kind of binds us up and throws all this stuff in our mind and it starts playing games and tricks, and you can't go to church and you're going to get judged, and if people really knew, I'm just telling you right now, God already knows. So you can't cover it up, you can't perfect it, you can't clothe it, you can't show up to church and use all your nice words, and all of a sudden God's like, "Oh, I didn't see anything you did this week." But what does he continue to say? "Come to me, all of you, that there has been something that you have learned from that has taught you, that is making you weary." And so that's where we come to this part where he says, take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle of heart. And you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke. And that's not the egg yoke. That is an actual yoke that goes between two oxen that in those days, which I've never seen, but what I was told in Bible college, what it was a piece of wood that went over both of their necks. And typically how it would work is one who had been seasoned, an oxen who had been seasoned and knew how to do it and would do it effortlessly. They would bring a young oxen that had never done this before, and they would just put the yoke over that young oxen's neck, and they really didn't have to do much. They would just kind of follow the big ox around. So Jesus is saying here, listen, and what I think is interesting as we look at this passage and we kind of interact with it, that there's this reality that we've been taught something that is causing us to be weary and burdened. And Jesus is saying, I want to reteach you. I want you to come with me, because what I'm about to show you is going to change you in a way that you're no longer burdened and weary and full of restlessness. You come to me just as you are and let me do something in you that you never thought you could experience. So the question is, and the reality is he wants to help you not stay as you are. Romans 12:2 says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. And I want you to see this. But let Ryan transform you. Let yourself, no. Let's go back to what he says. Even while you were still a sinner, even in your best dressed day, it's still not good enough. So therefore, I'm going to do the heavy lifting. I'm going to make you good. Like when you get, socks or underwear in the package and you pull it out and it's got inspected by number 23 or whatever it is. It's like God looked at you and said, you're good. You didn't need to do anything. He's the one that's doing the heavy lifting. So here's how it works. How does this changing work? As he says he's going to change you, how does that actually take place? And that's where I want to spend the majority of my time this morning in an illustration that Jesus does as he's talking and kind of painting the picture of this interaction between the Father and you and I. As we live in this world and we're burdened and we're carrying things and we're trying to get better, but it seems like we can't. And he wants to show us how to change. Because I don't know about you, whenever I have been told to change, I find that it's more impossible than it was easy. Especially in the context of marriage, right? Like you're like, please, or even with raising kids, you try to be different and all you do is you continually find yourself not measuring up. So how does this change take place? Well, Jesus illustrates this idea of him doing the heavy lifting by a story. And it's the story of the prodigal son. And it goes like this. There's a father who has two sons. And one son comes to him and says, Dad, I'm done. I'm done with this and I just want to go do my thing. And so that son goes off and lives that life and he takes the inheritance that he's been given. The father gives it to him. He loves him and the son goes off and just does whatever he wants and wastes it all. And then as he's in a pig trough eating the food that the pigs eat, he comes to his senses and says, this is so bad. Even the servants and the slaves in my father's house eat better than this. I'm headed home. Surely my dad will just let me be a hired hand somewhere. And so the story goes on that the son begins to work his way, and the father, and I love how the story goes, the father saw the son a long way off, and he came running. And he wrapped his arms around the son and he held him. And then this is where it gets amazing. And this is how the transaction of change begins to happen. You see, Jesus said, learn from me. I'll teach you. I want to show you. While you were still a sinner, Christ, not me, Ryan Malouff, but Christ died for you. And so this is how it works. the first thing that the Father says is he says, get a robe, which means we have been made right. Did I move it? Sorry. There's a lot going on with my hands right now. Look at this verse. The robe signifies, so the father yelled at his servants and said, get a robe, get the best robe for my son. And he puts the robe over him. Why? Because Christ made us right with God. The Father made him instantly right. There was nothing that the Son had to do but stand there and say, I'm here. And the Father put the best robe on him. Christ made us right with God. He made us pure and holy, and he freed us from the stain, the wrinkle, the heartache, the weight of sin. And here we stand. Now here's the beautiful part when it comes to how does this change take place. The Father did all the heavy lifting with Jesus. But then we have the freedom to change. It's only that when we've been clothed in that garment of I got you, son, I love you. I look at you and all I see is my son or daughter. What that does for us is all of a sudden we then have the freedom to look what it says. Throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. But that only happens in the freedom of covering. I then, because I have the outer garments of Christ, can then look at the garments that I have wore that have come from the sinful nature, have come from this world, have come from wrong thoughts and wrong perceptions of myself and what God is and what he wants to do. And all of a sudden, I then have the freedom to change. You see what I'm saying here? I want to take the burden off of you. And I want to take the burden off of us trying to change one another. The change comes from the security of knowing he covered me. And then in that process of him covering me, I'm like, you know what? This shirt just doesn't work anymore. This isn't who I am. But it's only under the covering do I take it off. I'm never exposed. Do you see how this change takes place? I'm never exposed. I'm constantly covered in the robe of righteousness. This is what we fear. If anyone really knows what's going on, I'll be rejected. The Father put the robe on you. You can't be rejected. He saw you in your worst. You're stinky, you're nasty, you've been hanging out with pigs, man, and you probably still smell. But you're covered. That robe's yours. And sorry for the slang, ain't nobody going to take it from you. And it just keeps getting better. Next, he calls for the ring, the signet ring of the family, which represents significance and authority. Most of our life, we're searching for significance. What's my place? And we're trying to figure out, how do I have a voice that matters? So most of us live our life trying to navigate, how do I get a voice? So we think that it's by school or having the greatest job. And all of a sudden what you see is that the Father walks up to the Son and he puts the ring on his finger. And what does it say? This is the heavy lifting that God does. Galatians 4:7, God has made you his heir. You, from the moment you said yes, have significance and authority. The Father has given you a voice in the family. You don't have to try to impress anyone or show anybody your mega skills. Because I'm just telling you right now, your skills aren't even enough to impress anyone because God is that good. He's big. In himself, he's impressive. He actually doesn't need anyone, but he chooses us to be his children. And he immediately puts significance and authority on us. He does the heavy lifting. The reason why this matters to me is when you have failed fourth grade several times and struggled reading and you feel like you're not good at anything that the world measures. I was having a conversation with a young man who was just struggling in school, and I was just telling him, I said, listen, for some of us whose minds don't operate in that way, you just are going to have to work until it's over. But know that it will end. And your brain will then astound you in ways that the school could not measure, but God has already set up for you. And so look what happens. The ring now, I have significance. I don't have to prove it. I don't have to show you. I don't have to impress you. All of a sudden, I'm just significant and I have authority. I have a voice. I have a seat at the table. This is what Paul talks about Jesus in Philippians 2, 5-7. He says, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privilege. He took the humble position of a servant. You cannot serve people when you're dealing with insignificance and lack of authority. All you want to do is dominate. All you want to do is be in charge. All you want to do is show. All you want to be is the center. And you're going to struggle with this idea of how do I be a servant, and you can't figure it out until you realize he put a ring on your finger. He gave you significance by becoming his heir. You have all the right and the authority. You don't have to try to, well, how come someone has it better than you? He has something wonderful for you. Don't worry about them. My son knows he's mine. He doesn't go, oh, Dad, how come? He's like, man, Dad, can you just give it to me? Which causes us to change and become selfless. You can't become selfless until you recognize you have significance and authority by him. Jesus did the heavy lifting. Let's go on. Next, he pulls out the shoes. I got my sick Adidas. I'm going to let you figure out how to do that. I'm not going to touch those. I'm just going to leave those right there. I mean, come on. I'm it's an illustration, but let's not get too crazy, okay? All right. Shoes. All of a sudden, now that we're covered and we have significance and authority, we can then lean into our purpose. We're no longer trying to figure out who we are. We know who we are. We're his. So he says, this is Paul, I do everything to spread the good news and to share in its blessing. So I run with purpose in every step. I'm not just shadow boxing. I'm not just wasting time. How many of you felt like I feel like I'm running in circles. I don't know what it is and I can't seem to get there. Why? Because you're trying to impress someone. And by the way, that's a hole that can never be filled. But when all of a sudden you recognize that the Father is impressed by you, he loves you, he's covered you, not because of anything that you've done, but because of his radical love for you. And he's put a ring on your finger. He's given you a seat. He said you're mine and you have everything that I have is yours. It allows you to finally, for the first time in your life, step into your God-given purpose, which is showing off to the world who Jesus is in a unique and incredible way, only through you. And so what he does is the heavy lifting. He all of a sudden puts the shoes on your feet, and you get to live in your purpose by what God made you to be. So the way I show off Jesus to the world, that's why he says, listen, if you're a teacher, then teach. If you're one who likes to show hospitality, then cook your face off. If you love to encourage, then encourage and do it well. Step into it because you no longer have to prove it. Now you just get to be it. So now I get to live on purpose. So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but those who are wise and make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. And then finally, he yells at the top of his lungs, kill the fatted calf. I love this part. Because when you've come from a place of trying to impress and do, you always feel like there's not enough. It's called lack. But all of a sudden, the Father, he says, now to him who is able to do increasingly more than we can ever ask, imagine, according to his power that is work within us. Now here's how it works. God surprises us. And we're like, for me? This is awesome. And yet then we still go back into, but I mean, I might eat all that. And then what? Okay, just remember who said to you to come. He's the God who created everything. Therefore, it just keeps coming. And just keeps coming. And when you thought there wasn't enough, he's got more for you. You see, he's the Father that says, immeasurably, that's more than you can ever imagine, think, or comprehend. He's got more for you. It's not just one, it's more and more. And all of a sudden, you begin to live from a lifestyle of rather than lack and fear that somehow someone's going to take it. The world's coming to an end. I literally don't live from a place of lack. I live from a place of recognizing that he said, I can't even imagine how much he has for me. So here's the thing. It's the beautiful part. He said this. He says, don't even worry about what to say when they call you in. He goes, I'll give you the words. I'm the God of more than enough. When you all of a sudden go, man, I really feel like we're supposed to give this, and you're like, it's all. How am I going to buy that bigger TV now? He challenges us to live from his abundance rather than our lack, which allows us, the fatted calf, causes us to live in generosity. You prepare a feast before my enemies. And I used to think of like, neener, 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 I got more than you. That's at least what I thought when I was a kid and I read Psalm 23. I was pumped out of my mind. But I love how he words it. You prepare a feast before my enemies so that I can give to my enemies. I have more than enough. I have stuff that you know not of. And it comes from my Father. And he gives me generosity that is going to blow your mind. And you want to freak your enemies out? Stop yelling at them. Stop making sure your property line is right. And stand there with speakers yelling at them. Instead, how can you lavish them with the generosity of there's more than enough? Rather than trying to defend, we begin to lavish. And you watch God turn the hearts and open doors that no man can close. In closing, come as you are and let him transform you into the best version of you. Can we give these guys a big hand? Thank you. My prayer today is that you leave this place realizing that change is possible. And change takes place from the heavy lifting ability of the Father. And the more you lean into who he is, the more it changes you and you become willing. And I just would say this, just be a yes person. Yes, Lord. Whatever you want, yes, I'll come. Because how did it start with the son? He just came home. You're home. And you need to know that there's no judgment here. You need to know that we accept. Why? Because we understand our own life and the robe that we wear, that we didn't make this happen, that he did, which allows us to be patient. Patient with one another, patient with the process. Well, did you see what they were wearing? Yeah. Maybe instead of pointing it out, let's put a robe over of his righteousness and his love. And we stop pointing out and we just start letting his love transform.